I came home on a Wednesday afternoon. The sky hung low, and the air smelled faintly of cold rain and damp asphalt. I was bone-tired. My mother had just come out of surgery, a minor procedure, they said, but worry never feels minor when it's about your mother. I'd spent 5 days at her bedside, sleeping in a recliner that groaned every time I shifted, eating vending machine dinners, answering texts from Daniel that grew increasingly short and infrequent. He'd told me work was slammed. A deal, or maybe a client presentation, something important. I didn't press. It was always something important. But when I opened the front door, I was met not with the comfort of home, but with a silence so sharp it sliced through me. The house was still, not in the peaceful way I used to love, but in the sterile, echoing way of hotel lobbies and hospital hallways. It was the stillness of secrets, not solitude. I dropped my suitcase by the door and stepped inside. The air felt wrong, off. There was a faint scent lingering, sweet, floral, too bright. It wasn't my perfume. Mine sat dusty on the dresser, half-used and tired, like I felt. I walked toward the living room, where the mantel always greeted me with familiarity. The worn oak frame of our wedding photo had sat there for 6 years. Daniel's arm around me, my dress like a whisper of silk against the late autumn trees behind us. I used to pause and look at that photo whenever I needed to remember we were real. But it was gone. In its place was a different frame, same size, same wood, even the same placement as if nothing had changed. But inside was a photo of a woman. I didn't know. She was laughing, teeth bright, hair tousled by ocean wind. Neon bikini, bronze skin. She clung to Daniel like she belonged there, like that was her mantle, her husband, her frame. I blinked once, hard, as if maybe grief or exhaustion had made me hallucinate. But the photo didn't go away. My heart didn't leap or break. It settled. A low, heavy ache that curled inward and rooted itself in my chest. I didn't touch the frame. I couldn't. It felt like if I did, I might disappear entirely. I wandered through the house like a woman dreaming, a ghost floating through rooms that no longer remembered her. The kitchen smelled faintly of something citrusy. There was a wine glass in the sink, with a smudge of pink lipstick near the rim, too pink, too playful to be mine. I haven't worn lipstick in over a year. In the bathroom, a bottle of expensive shampoo sat beside mine. Not hidden, not tucked away like a secret. It was placed next to mine, as if whoever used it was now part of the household. I opened the bedroom closet. My clothes were there, but they were crowded. There were new hangers, silk blouses in pastel colors, skirts too short for my taste, perfume that smelled like sugar and peaches clung to the fabric. Her scent was everywhere. Even ghosts, leave traces. Maybe I already had. The bed was made, perfectly. The kind of perfect I never quite managed. Daniel always teased me about how I'd never learned to tuck the corners. Now it was flawless, like someone else had been here long enough to leave. No flaws at all. I sat on the edge of the bed, and the mattress barely sighed beneath me. Then I saw his phone. Left on the nightstand, careless. He'd never leave it out like that if I were expected. Daniel was always private about his phone, password protected, Face ID only, tilted screen away from me when he texted. But today, it was there. Screen. Up, charging. I didn't mean to touch it. Truly. I hovered for a moment, guilt prickling my skin, but then a notification lit up the screen. Miss you already. From a number not saved in his contacts. My hand moved on its own. The password hadn't changed. I knew his code. Still our anniversary date. Inside, I found an entire photo album labeled Fun in Tulum. The woman from the mantel was in every frame. wrapped in a white sheet in bed, holding hands with Daniel at sunset. Clinking wine glasses at what looked like our favorite resort, one he'd said was too expensive this year. I sat still for a long time, phone in hand. Tears didn't come right away. My throat was too tight. My eyes too dry. This wasn't just betrayal. This was erasure. He had taken the frame, the space, the life I built, and given it to someone else. And worse, he had let her replace me while I was tending to my sick mother. I should have thrown the phone, screamed, broken something. But all I did was stand, calmly, and place the device back where I found it. I walked to the mantel once more, stared at the bikini woman. I didn't know her name, but she knew mine. She'd slept in my bed. She'd drunk from my wine glass. She'd watched my husband strip off his wedding ring and make a home inside her laughter. I reached up and touched the edge of the frame. My fingers trembled. And still, I didn't cry. Instead, I whispered to no one. You erased me. Then, I turned around because I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to let him know I knew. Not yet. I met Daniel in the fading light of autumn. My final year of grad school blurred by thesis drafts and coffee cups with lipstick rings. But I remember him, clearer than I should. He walked into the bookstore where I worked part-time, dressed, in a charcoal coat and confidence. He asked me to recommend a book on leadership, then complimented the way I pronounced Kafka. He said it like it meant something, like I was interesting. No one had said that in a while. We went out for coffee 2 days later. He ordered an Americano and listened like every word I said held weight. When I talked about my dream to work in, publishing, to edit stories that might shape the world, he smiled and said, "You're going to do amazing things." And I believed him. Daniel knew how to make you feel seen, until he didn't. The change wasn't sudden. It never is. It crept, in like mold behind paint. First came the small suggestions. Maybe don't mention your politics at dinner. My clients are old school. Then, do you think you'll want a full-time job right after graduation? I mean, with everything we're planning. He never said it outright, but the question lingered. What kind of woman do you want to be? I thought I was choosing. Choosing love. Choosing us. I didn't see I was unraveling, thread by thread. When I let go of the offer from the New York press, one, I'd cried over getting. I told myself it was for the life we were building. I moved into his condo, which became our place after I painted the walls with my own hands and burned my signature vanilla sandalwood candles in every room. I planned our dinners, rearranged his chaos, remembered every anniversary down to the hour. And Daniel? He thrived. He'd come home late smelling like cologne that wasn't his, saying a client had dragged him out for drinks. I'd kiss his cheek and believe him. At first. But I started noticing things. Always subtle. A smudge of lipstick on his collar, different from mine. A new contact in his phone saved only as M. Lingerie receipts I didn't recognize. The way he would say, "You've let yourself go a little," with a teasing tone that didn't hide the dig. Or worse, "You used to be more fun." Sometimes I looked in the mirror and barely saw myself. I'd become someone who made excuses for the man she loved. Someone who stayed quiet to keep the peace. My friends noticed before I did. Claire, my roommate from college, once said over brunch, "You don't laugh the way you used to." I shrugged, sipped my mimosa, and said work had been busy. She didn't push, but I saw the sadness in her eyes. Eventually, they stopped calling. One by one. I can't blame them. I was always tired, always unavailable, always trying to prove I was enough. Daniel didn't ask about them. He never asked about the manuscript I started writing and never finished. The one he once read the first pages of and said, "It's cute. Kinda chicklet, right?" I told myself he didn't mean it that way. That he didn't know how much it mattered to me. But something inside me shifted that day. Not enough to leave. Just enough to tuck the manuscript away in a drawer I never opened again. I kept telling myself marriage meant commitment. That rough patches were normal, that all couples had problems. I thought if I could just hold on tighter, we'd find our way back. But it was like trying to hold water in my hands. No matter how tightly I clenched, it slipped through. The worst part wasn't the loneliness. It was the pretending. I became an expert at it. I smiled through dinner parties where Daniel did all the talking, usually about himself. I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. I wore dresses he picked out, low-cut, bright, unlike anything I'd choose. I erased myself one compromise at a time. Then, one weekend, his parents came to visit. His mother brought a pie and a bottle of red and hugged me tightly at the door. She had always been kind, if a bit reserved. But that night, after dinner, when Daniel was in the kitchen cleaning up, she reached for my hand. Her fingers closed around mine with quiet urgency, and she whispered, "Are you okay?" 3 words, soft but pointed. As if she saw the cracks I'd worked so hard to cover. I opened my mouth to say yes. Instead, I nodded, and I smiled, because that's what I did. The next morning, I washed the wine glasses and cried silently in the kitchen. Not because I was in pain, but because someone saw it. And I still lied. Somewhere between that moment and the photo on the mantel, I became a ghost in my own life. I thought I had chosen this. That I had loved him so well, so hard. He'd remember and turn back toward me. But now I see the truth. I wasn't choosing. I was disappearing, and he didn't stop me. The photo haunted me. That neon bikini. Her laughter frozen mid-burst. The casual way her hand curled over Daniel's bare chest, like it belonged there. Like I never had. I didn't confront him. Not right away. Instead, I became someone else. Quiet. Calculating. Watchful. There's a kind of madness in noticing everything. The way his phone lit up when he thought I wasn't looking. The new cologne he wore, musky and sharp. Nothing like the cedar wood I once gifted him. The twice-a-week gym bag that came home still zipped, still folded, still unused. I started listening. To silences, to patterns, to lies disguised as logistics. One Thursday night, Daniel came into the living room while I was folding laundry. Our towels, still damp, still warm from the dryer. He kissed my head like nothing was wrong and said, "I have to fly to Chicago this weekend. Early meeting Monday. I'll be gone 2 nights." He didn't look at me when he said it. "Okay," I whispered, not trusting myself to meet his gaze. That night, after he fell asleep beside me, his back turned. As usual, I took his laptop from the office and opened the tracking software he'd installed months ago when we got new phones. "Just in case one of us gets lost," he'd said. It pinged. A little blue dot. Not moving, and not in Chicago. This next night, he kissed me goodbye with a suitcase in hand. I stood at the door and watched the Uber tail lights disappear into the fog. My stomach twisted, a soft churn of intuition I'd trained myself to ignore. But I didn't ignore it this time. I waited until midnight. The house breathed with that eerie stillness again. Then I opened my laptop. His phone was 2 miles away. Not at the airport, not in a hotel. But on Oakmere Lane, a quiet cul-de-sac with magnolia trees and the kind of houses with twinkling porch lights. He wasn't hiding well anymore. I got in my car. I don't remember the drive, just the cold sweat on my palms against the steering wheel and the way my heart felt like it was punching through my ribs. When I pulled onto Oakmere, I turned the headlights off and coasted, silent as a shadow. And there it was. His car, parked in front of a house I didn't recognize, under a flickering street lamp. The curtains in the front window were half drawn. Light poured through, casting silhouettes on the walls. I parked down the street, sat there for 5 minutes, 10. Then I got out. I don't know what I expected. Some part of me hoped to be wrong, that maybe it was all a misunderstanding, that he really was on a business trip and left his phone with a friend, some impossible story. But I already knew. The front door wasn't locked. That broke something in me, even before I stepped inside. He didn't even try to hide. The hallway smelled faintly of her perfume, cheap and sweet, like candy melted in the sun. I moved through the house like a ghost, barefoot, barely breathing. Their laughter led me to the bedroom. My bedroom, our quilt, our nightstands. And there they were. She was on top of him, head thrown back, laughing like this was some romantic comedy. His hands were on her hips, his face so familiar it made me sick. My ring, my wedding ring, glinted on the dresser, next to a bra that wasn't mine. They didn't see me. Not right away. But I saw them. Everything. Her. Him. The life they were stealing in my absence. And still, I didn't scream. I just turned around, walked out, gripped the doorknob so tightly I thought it might splinter in my hand. It wasn't strength that kept me quiet. It was the weight of years, of anniversaries, of scraped knees and swallowed apologies. It was exhaustion. I drove home in silence, the radio off. The world was too loud already. When I walked through the front door, the photo was still there. Bikini girl, laughing, triumphant. I didn't take it down. I sat on our wedding quilt, the one we'd picked out on a rainy Saturday in September years ago. I remember how we argued about the pattern. He wanted something bold. I wanted something soft. We chose a compromise. Now, it just felt like a lie stitched in cotton. I stared at the wall until my vision blurred. Then I cried. Not delicate movie scene tears, but the kind that shake your spine, that leave salt crusting your lips and lungs, burning. I cried until the quilt was soaked, until my ribs felt bruised from sobbing, until I had nothing left. And when the crying stopped, something shifted. There was a moment, silent, fragile, when I realized I wasn't thinking about him anymore, or her, or the betrayal. I was thinking about me, about the girl who used to write poems on napkins, who used to run 5 miles before sunrise, who used to laugh loudly, unabashedly, at stupid things, who once dreamed of her name in print. She was still in here, somewhere, beneath the ash and the grief, and for the first time in years, I didn't wonder how to fix my marriage. I wondered how to find her again. I stood up, knees trembling, and went to the office. I opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet where I kept old bills and tax papers, and there it was, my journal, the one I'd written in sporadically, always with the hope that someday I'd look back and see progress, growth, love. Instead, I saw my own erasure. Page after page of me doubting myself, of dismissing red flags, of covering for his cruelty. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe he's just stressed. Maybe if I just try harder. I flipped through the entries like they were confessions, from a woman on the edge, and I knew I couldn't stay here. Not like this. The next morning, before the sun rose, I started gathering everything. Receipts, text screenshots, calendar entries, voicemails, photos, bank statements. I built a quiet war chest, methodical and focused. Not for him, not to win, but for me. I wasn't going to let him rewrite the story. Not this time. The wedding quilt went in a box. The photo on the mantel, I didn't break it. I wrapped it in newspaper, like fragile glass deserves. I wasn't going to let her live in my home a second longer. And my wedding ring? I held it in my palm for a long time. It was warm from my skin, from years of wearing it like armor. Then I slid it off, and I didn't feel empty. I felt free. There was no goodbye, no dramatic confrontation, no suitcase thrown down the stairs, no shouting match. I think that would have made it easier for him, something loud he could use to paint me as irrational, bitter, unstable. But I gave him nothing, just silence. I waited until his next business trip, which I now understood to be his code for disappearing into someone else's sheets. He left on a Tuesday morning. He kissed my cheek and told me to water the plants while he was gone. I said, nothing, just nodded, watching him walk away like he hadn't burned the foundation of our home to ash. Once his car was gone, I moved with purpose. I didn't pack everything, just enough. My journals. A stack of old photos I kept hidden in the back of the closet. One dress, forest green, that always made me feel powerful even when I didn't believe I deserved to. My grandmother's locket. A box of books that had once lived on my nightstand, long before Daniel started piling his things over mine. It felt surgical, removing pieces of myself from the wreckage. I left the wedding quilt folded neatly on the bed. Let him sleep beneath the symbol of the life he shattered. The ring was still in the drawer. I didn't take it. Not yet. I drove east. The city thinned out. Concrete gave way to winding roads, soft trees, salt-licked air. I kept the windows cracked just enough to taste the ocean before I saw it. The sea always reminded me of my mother. How she used to say the waves were proof that something could be powerful and peaceful at the same time. That's what I wanted. To become. Someday. I found a small coastal town tucked between bluffs. The kind of place with handwritten menus, wind chimes on every porch, and sunsets that made you feel holy. No one knew me there. No one cared who I had been. I rented a modest Airbnb above a florist's shop. 2 rooms, chipped paint, and a balcony that looked out onto the water. It smelled like lavender and old wood. I fell asleep the first night with the windows open, and the sound of the waves folding over each other, rhythmically, like a lullaby written just for me. The silence was terrifying at first. For so long my days had been filled with the noise of Daniel, his criticism, his excuses, his presence. Without it, I felt like a house stripped of furniture, echoing, unfamiliar. I sat on the balcony with a cup of coffee and just stared at the ocean. For hours. Some mornings I didn't move at all. Just watched the tide pull away and return, like it was reminding me that healing isn't linear. It recedes before it surges. Week passed before I found the bookstore. It was tucked behind a cafe with frosted windows and a crooked sign, The Rusted Page. Inside, it smelled like cedar, paper, and faint cinnamon. The owner was a woman named Ingrid, late 60s, silver, braid, steel spine. She didn't ask me questions. Just offered me part-time hours when I commented on a display of poetry books. I shelved novels, brewed tea, sorted donations. It was quiet work, honest work, healing work. Ingrid became more than a boss. She became a mirror. One afternoon, she sat beside me during a slow hour and said, "You have sad eyes, but not broken ones." I looked at her, startled. "What does that mean?" She smiled gently. "It means you're still in there." I didn't cry right away, but when I got home that night, I sobbed into my pillow. Because she was right. Somewhere, beneath the grief and guilt and hollowed-out bones, I was still in there. I started therapy. Online sessions, soft-voiced guidance from a woman who helped me name things I'd never dared to label. Emotional neglect, manipulation, identity erosion. I thought healing would feel like triumph. Sometimes it felt like drowning, but I kept showing up. I journaled again, pages and pages, not just about Daniel, but about me, the girl I used to be, the woman I wanted to become. I wrote about sunsets and coffee spoons and the way my chest used to ache when I laughed too hard. The dress, the green one, I wore it on a Saturday just for myself. I had nowhere to be, no one to impress. I made tea, played Nina Simone on vinyl, and stood barefoot on the balcony, twirling slowly, arms outstretched. That night, I didn't flinch when I looked in the mirror. One morning, I took the wedding ring from my coat pocket. I'd kept it there all this time. I don't know why. Maybe as proof that it all really happened, that once, someone promised me forever and handed me betrayal instead. I walked down to the water just after sunrise. The sky was painted in bruised blues and soft pinks. I sat on a weathered rock and tied the ring to a stone with twine. My hands didn't tremble. I whispered something, not a goodbye, not really, more like a benediction. Then I stood and threw it into the sea. It made no sound, just disappeared. But I felt lighter. That afternoon, Ingrid handed me a book of Mary Oliver poems and said, "You should read this one. She understands women like us." I opened it at random. "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" I closed the book, pressed it to my chest, and smiled. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't surviving someone else's choices. Was living mine. There was something about salt water that sharpened my thinking. Maybe it was the way the sea stripped everything back, left only bones and salt behind. Maybe it was how the horizon reminded me that there was still more to see, to claim, to be. In that coastal town, I had learned how to breathe again. But now, I wanted more than oxygen. I wanted truth. I wanted reckoning. I wasn't prey anymore. It started with a quiet call to a lawyer, a woman recommended by Ingrid, who knew someone who knew someone. Her name was Lena, sharp, thorough, soft-spoken in a way that made you lean in and take her seriously. We talked for 2 hours. I told her everything. "No, I don't have children," I said. "No, he doesn't know I'm leaving him. Yes, I have proof." I didn't tell her how much that last part cost me. How long I sat with my laptop open at night, hands shaking over the keys, heart pounding like I was trespassing in my own life. I knew Daniel's password patterns too well. He recycled birthdays and dog names, tucked behind lazy variations. He never believed I was smart enough to notice. That was his first mistake. Inside his cloud storage, I found hell. Photos, videos, screenshots of flirtatious messages that blurred the line between pathetic and obscene. He hadn't just cheated once, or with one woman. There were 7. Different. Names, same tone, entitlement cloaked in charm. My stomach churned, but I stayed with it. I saved everything, categorized by date, labeled by name. I even made a spreadsheet. Not because I needed it for court, but because I wanted to see my architecture of his betrayal. I wanted to map the exact territory he had tried to convince me didn't exist. I stopped crying. I started planning. This wasn't about rage. Rage burns too quickly. This was about clarity. Lena coached me through the financial steps. We froze, shared accounts, filed the initial paperwork discreetly. She told me to be careful. Emotionally, physically. She'd seen too many women undone at the 11th hour by narcissists who couldn't bear the loss of control. "I'm not afraid of him anymore," I said. She didn't smile. "Even so, move like a shadow, then strike like light." So I did. In the mornings, I walked along the cliffs, salt on my lips, journal in hand. I wrote about war, not wounds. About reclaiming not just my life, but the version of myself he tried to erase. And then the perfect opportunity fell into my lap. Daniel's parents, Eleanor and Richard, were planning a dinner, a retirement celebration for his father. I found the email in his inbox, nestled between discount codes and flirtations with a woman named Brielle. They adored me, and I had adored them, once. Eleanor had once pulled me aside and called me the glue of the family. Richard sent me rare books on birthdays and called me kiddo. I knew, in my bones, they didn't know what their son had become, or maybe they did. Maybe they just didn't want to look too closely. Either way, they were about to see him in high definition. I didn't RSVP. I booked a flight. I would arrive the day of the dinner, uninvited, unexpected, unshakable. But first, I built something. For myself. My career, my real one. The one I had folded up and tucked away like a childhood diary. I built an online portfolio. Gathered old pieces I'd written, edited, polished. I sent out queries to small publishing houses, literary blogs, even content agencies. I edited during bookstore shifts, submitted during late nights under fairy lights on the balcony. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't secure, but it was mine. And then an offer. Part-time editorial work with a women's storytelling magazine. It didn't pay much, but it validated something deeper, that I was still sharp, still worth hiring, still here. I bought a new dress for the dinner, not revenge red, not widow black, emerald green, the same shade as the dress I danced in on the balcony, the one that reminded me of the girl I used to be, the girl Daniel tried to unmake. I paired it with a soft gold necklace and a scent I hadn't worn in years, jasmine and sandalwood, my mother's favorite. It felt like armor disguised as elegance. When I looked in the mirror that day, I didn't just see myself. I saw the storm. The flight was smooth. I didn't shake when the plane touched down. I didn't cry when the city unfolded beneath me, familiar and foreign all at once. At the hotel, I touched up my lipstick and slipped a printed folder into my purse. A hard copy compilation of Daniel's sins, labeled, color-coded, undeniable. That night, I arrived at his parents' house just as the guests were sipping wine on the patio. The backyard looked like a magazine spread. Fairy lights, catered trays, soft jazz humming in the background. Daniel didn't see me at first, but Eleanor did. Her face shifted from surprise to something softer, sadder. She came to greet me with both hands clasped over mine. "You came," she whispered. "Oh, sweetheart, I wasn't sure if—" "I needed to be here," I said. I didn't explain. She didn't ask. The moment came quickly. Daniel spotted me from across the garden, half laughing, holding a glass of scotch. His smile faltered, then dropped altogether. He walked toward me, fast. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed, under his breath, eyes flicking to the guests. "Celebrating your father," I said, voice syrup smooth. "This isn't the time." "No," I cut him off gently. "It's exactly the time." I clinked my glass gently, just once. The soft ring drew attention. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, raising my voice just enough. "But I wanted to share something with you all, especially with Richard and Eleanor." Daniel went pale. "I came tonight not just as a guest," I continued, "but as someone who's had the privilege and burden of knowing the full story behind this family's golden boy." A hush fell. Forks stopped clinking. Eleanor took a slow step toward me, concern darkening her brow. I pulled the folder. "From my purse. In here," I said, "is everything your son didn't want you to know. Affairs, lies, Manipulations. Over a year's worth. With multiple women. Some overlapping. All documented. Someone gasped. I didn't look to see who. Daniel moved like he might grab the folder, but I stepped back. Don't, I warned. Touch me, and you'll regret it more than you already do. I turned to his parents. I loved your son. I built my life around him. I left my dreams behind to support his. And he paid me back with betrayal wrapped in charm. I held the silence like a blade, then softly. But I'm not here for pity. I'm here because I've stopped pretending. I'm here to end the story on my terms. I handed the folder to Eleanor, who took it with trembling hands. Daniel stood frozen, jaw clenched, chest heaving. I turned and walked out. My heels clicked softly against the patio stones. I didn't look back. Not when I reached the gate. Not when I got into the car. Not even when the night air wrapped around me like applause. Back at the hotel, I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled off my earrings, and exhaled. There were no tears. Only calm. Only the slow realization that I had finally chosen myself, out loud, on purpose, and without apology. And that felt like power. It was the clink of crystalline laughter that greeted me first, the soft, practiced chaos of wealth and family pride. Daniel stood near the head of the table, sharp in his tailored navy suit, spinning a story about business, about deals and deadlines, hands moving like he was conducting his own symphony. I hovered in the threshold of the dining room for a moment, letting the hum of conversation settle into my bones. His parents had done everything to make this night feel like a celebration. Gold-rimmed plates, fresh white linens, candles flickering in crystal holders like little flames of memory. Eleanor looked radiant in pearl. Richard, slightly hunched, now but still broad-shouldered and warm-eyed. The scent of roast chicken and rosemary lingered in the air, grounded by something sweet. Apple tart, maybe, or cinnamon. I stepped into the room, my heels soft against the wood. Daniel turned at the sound and froze for a flicker of a second, just long enough for me to see it. Fear. A quick, sharp flash that he tried to smother with a smile. There she is, he said smoothly, like he hadn't begged me to stay away just days before. His arm slid around my waist as he guided me toward the empty seat beside him. I let him. Just once more. One final act before the curtain dropped. I played my part. I nodded through small talk, smiled when appropriate, laughed once, softly, when Richard told an old story about Daniel falling out of a tree and insisting the branch had betrayed him. That story used to make me ache with affection. Tonight, it tasted like rust. I watched Daniel out of the corner of my eye, watched how his thumb grazed the screen of his phone, casual and constant. He had always thought he could outmaneuver me, that I wouldn't dare touch the pedestal he'd built with lies and curated charm. He was wrong. The evidence sat on my phone like a loaded chamber. Photos, voice notes, screenshots. I had packaged them neatly, respectfully, not just to expose him, to free myself, to say, this is what he did, this is who he is. And I am done pretending otherwise. I waited until dessert. The apple tart came out, steaming and golden, and someone poured champagne into Eleanor's flute. Glasses clinked. A toast was about to begin. That was when I tapped the screen of my phone. Airdrop. 13 nearby devices. I selected all. The photos went first. Daniel with his arms wrapped around Brielle in the hotel pool. Daniel shirtless on a couch. Not ours Daniel in bed with another woman's bare leg beside him, time-stamped while I was homesick last December. Then came the voice notes, his words, his promises to keep this secret, his jokes about how my wife would die if she knew, and then the messages. Hundreds of them. Laughter died mid-sentence. Forks stilled. Phones buzzed in unison, a digital avalanche. The The silence was instant and violent. Eleanor's phone chimed. She squinted, tapped, and then her hand trembled. She lowered the screen like it had turned to ice. Richard looked at his own phone and visibly paled. Daniel was still mid-toast, mid-lie, when he realized, "The shift, what's going on?" he asked, his voice tightening. "Why is everyone... what the hell?" Someone gasped. Another woman murmured, "Oh my God." "Wait," Daniel stammered, scanning the table, his eyes wild. "What is this? Who? What did you—" I didn't answer. I stood slowly. My chair made the faintest scrape against the wood floor. I took the wedding ring off my finger. It felt warm from my skin. I walked to the dessert table, found the silver cake knife, and placed the ring beside it. Let him slice his victory with it. Then I turned to his parents. Eleanor looked like she'd aged 10 years in one breath. Richard's jaw clenched, but his eyes, those kind eyes, met mine, and I saw something I didn't expect. Regret. Respect. Maybe even sorrow. Daniel lunged toward me, voice rising. "You don't understand what you've done. This is my family. You don't get to pull stunts like this just because you're hurt." I faced him for the last time. "No," I said quietly. "I did this because I finally remembered who I am, and who you are." He opened his mouth again, but I was already walking away, out the door, down the steps, past the candlelight and the flurry of whispers. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. In the car, I stared straight ahead until the driver pulled onto the main road and the house vanished from view. The train ride back was quiet, the hum of motion soothing in its constancy. I sat by the window, forehead resting against cool glass, watching the city shrink behind me, its lights like scattered stars, its towers slowly fading into the dark. My reflection stared back at me, hair pinned neatly, lipstick still intact. But there was something different in her eyes now. Something settled. Unafraid. I lost everything I thought I needed, but I found myself. I moved into a small apartment 2 months later. Top floor, old windows. Lavender growing on the fire escape. The walls smelled like sunshine and second chances. I painted one of them sky blue. I filled the shelves with secondhand novels, dried flowers, and old photographs I used to keep in boxes. Some of me and my mother. Some of just me, before I forgot how to smile like I meant it. I kept working for the magazine. The hours were odd, the deadlines relentless, but the words made me feel alive. I wrote articles on grief and healing. I edited stories from women who had lost and fought and bled and stayed, my inbox filled with thank yous, my calendar filled with meetings, my soul filled with purpose. And sometimes, late at night, I would light a candle, brew chamomile tea, and reread my old journals. The ones I once filled with apologies for feelings I hadn't done anything wrong for having. I read the pages where I doubted myself. I didn't cross them out. I let them stay. They were proof that I grew. One day, I walked past a pawn shop and saw a dress in the window. Emerald green. It was nothing special. Off the rack, slightly wrinkled. But I bought it. Anyway, I wore it to a poetry reading downtown, where I sat beside strangers and clapped for women I didn't know, each one brave enough to read her truth aloud. That night, walking home, the breeze kissed my neck, and the moonlight found my skin. I wasn't lonely. Not anymore. Some nights, I still dream of the sea. Not the drowning kind of dream. Not anymore. Now, I'm always standing at the shore, wind tugging at my coat, waves licking the edges of my boots. In the dream, I open my palm and find a ring there, smooth, silver, weightless. I kiss it once, and then I throw it as far as I can. It never makes a sound when it hits the water. Only silence, only peace.